talking about crime. Tell me who are the criminals? I really don't see them. I don't want no peace. I need equal rights and justice. We got to get equal rights and justice. And there be no crime. Equal rights and justice. There be no criminals. Equal rights and justice. Everyone is fighting for equal rights and justice. Palestinians fighting for equal rights and justice. Down in Angola, equal rights and justice. Down in Botswana, equal rights and justice. Down in Zimbabwe, equal rights and justice. Down in Rhodesia, equal rights and justice. Right here in Jamaica, equal rights.
King of kings, hallelujah, hallelujah. Lord of lords, hallelujah, hallelujah.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Jah, and the Word was Jah. In the beginning Jah created the heaven and the earth. Then he created man of his own likeness. He gave unto man wisdom, knowledge, understanding.
Jah is my help and my strength, so whom shall I fear? He's a shield upon my right and my left hand, so whom shall I be afraid? Jah is my king. Jah is my light and my salvation, so whom shall I fear? He's my guide throughout this creation, so whom shall I be afraid? Jah is my king. Jah is my guide in my resting and my rising, so whom shall I fear? He's my guide when I step out and forward in, so whom shall I be afraid? Jah is my king. Jah is my guide when Philistines come down upon me, so whom shall I fear? He's my guide when my enemies come to devour me, so whom shall I be afraid? Jah is my king. Jah is my guide from the pestilence of darkness, so whom shall I fear? He's my guide from the vampire flame. So shall I afraid?
Jah is my keeper.
Jah is my health and my strength. So whom shall I fear? He's a shield upon my right and my left hand. So whom shall I be afraid? Jah is my king.
Don't care where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. No mind your nationality, you have got the identity of an African. Cause if you come from Clarendon, and if you come from Portland, and if you come from Westmoreland, you're an African. So don't care where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. No mind your nationality, you have got the identity of an African. Cause if you come from Trinidad, and if you come from Nassau, and if you come from Cuba, you're an African. So don't care where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. No mind your complexion, there is no rejection, you're an African. Cause if your flexion high, 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 your flexion low, and if your flexion in between, you're an African. So don't care where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. No mind denomination, that is only segregation, you're an African. Cause if you go to the Catholic, and if you go to the Methodist, and if you go to the Church of God, you're an African. So don't care where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. No mind your nationality, you have got the identity of an African. Cause if you come from Brixton, and if you come from Eastday, and if you come from Wilsday, and if you come from Bronx, and if you come
are an
And if you
African.
come from Switzerland,
You are an African.
and if you come from Germany,
No woman, no cry. No woman, no cry. Said I remember when we used to sit in the government yard in Trenchtown. Oba serving the hypocrites as they would mingle with the good people we made. Good friends we have, oh good friends we've lost along the way. In this great future, you can't forget your past. So dry your tears, I say, and no woman no cry. No woman no cry. Little darling, don't shed no tears. No woman no cry. Said I remember when we used to sit in the government yard in Trenchtown, and then Georgie would make the firelight as it was love would burning through the night.
just to save the life I live. Oh, now I'm gonna be iron like a lion in Zion. I'm gonna be iron like a lion in Zion. Iron, lion, Zion. Iron, lion, Zion. Iron, lion, Zion. Iron like a lion in Zion.
Thank you very much. Sisters and brothers, good evening, and we do apologize for the late start, but we wish now to commence this evening's proceedings, and it's my pleasure now to invite the Reverend Gerard Phils to open us with the invocation, after which we will have the national anthem of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which we will ask you to remain standing. Thanks. Reverend Phils.
Invite us. I invite us all to bow and as we go to God in prayer. Everlasting and unchanging God, we pause at this moment to acknowledge who you are. A God who never changes, and a God who is eternal. You're the God who created the heavens and the earth and everything in it. All of nature you created, and you made all human beings, everyone, in your image. Heavenly Father, you made us to glorify you, living in right relationship with each other. And not only are you creator, but you are a sovereign God. This world belongs to you. As humans, we have our doubts, we have our questions, and we have our concerns. But you have proven over and over again that this is still your world, even though the wrong seems off so strong. You are still the one who controls the past, the present, and the future. You are still the God who has the power over all creation. And you are still the God whom nothing is impossible for. And not only are you sovereign, not only are you a God, and it's not that you are up there and we are down here. And it's not that you are proud and arrogant, but you are a God who is interested in our daily lives, as demonstrated through Jesus Christ. You're a God who loves us unconditionally. You're a God who wants to have intimate relationship with your creation. You're a God who is interested in our holistic well-being. And so, God, from Jesus, we know that you're a God of justice, a God of righteousness, seeking to reconcile this whole world to yourself, whether you're oppressed or the oppressor, whether you're black or you're white, whether you're from small island or big island, whether you're rich or you're poor. And so it is you, amazing God, that we ask for your presence this evening in this Oscar Allen Emancipation Memorial Lecture. We thank you for the life of Brother Oscar Allen and for the legacy that he have left and the lives that he has touched. We thank you for institutions such as the University of the West Indies, dear God. We thank you for the planners and organizers of this event. And so we ask, oh God, that you will come among us, guide our discussion, grant us vision, keep us focused so that we do not labor in vain. And may you be at the center of it all, so that your name may be glorified. In Jesus' name, amen.
Saint Vincent, lad so beautiful, with joyful hearts we pledge to thee our loyalty and love, and vow to keep shore to shore, and God bless and keep us true. High rule of fear and blessed isle, your mountains high, so clear and green, are home to me, though I may stray, a haven come serene. Whate'er the future brings, our faith will see us through. May peace reign from shore to shore, and God bless and keep us true. Our little sister islands are those gems, the lovely grenadines, upon their seas and golden sand, the sunshine ever beam. Whate'er the future brings, our faith will see us through. May peace reign from shore to shore, and God bless and keep us true.
Please be seated. Sisters and brothers, it's my pleasure to greet you and to welcome you to this evening's lecture. We first had this lecture in 2018, a year after Brother A died, to commemorate his life and legacy. And in 2019, we weren't able to have the lecture, and of course, the last 2 years, the COVID prevented us from having the lecture. And so I am particularly delighted to see you here this evening and to welcome you as Master of Ceremony, but of course that privilege and duty belongs to my colleague, the head of the Open Campus, Mrs. Deborah Dalrymple. But nonetheless, I am delighted to see you and to have you, and especially for those of you who are joining us via the internet, on the live stream on YouTube, and if I'm not mistaken, I think NBC Radio is also bringing this on their Facebook page. So we do have an internet audience this evening as well. But it's my honor to welcome Mrs. Dalrymple, to officially welcome you on behalf of Friends of Oscar Allen and the University of the West Indies Open Campus. Mrs. Dalrymple.
Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, Honorable Saboto Caesar, Dr. Adrian Fraser, former head of the Open Campus, our special guest speaker, Mr. Dobrin Homad, probably should be doctor, right? Staff and students of the UWI Open Campus, friends of Oscar Allen, members of Diamondites, specially invited guests, members of the media, sisters and brothers, welcome. And I would like to especially welcome you to the Oscar Allen Memorial Emancipation Lecture. Over the years, the Open Campus St. Vincent has commemorated Emancipation Day with a lecture or a panel discussion. The Open Campus, however, encourages us to honor our sons and daughters who have passed on but had made sterling contribution to our country's development. by a series of memorial lectures. Thus, when the Friends of Oscar Allen approached the open campus to consider renaming of the Emancipation Lecture for Oscar Allen, it was an honor for us to do so. Due to the COVID pandemic, we were unable to present this lecture for the past 2 years. But this evening, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the resumption of this collaborative event. A special welcome to our guest lecturer, Mr. Omad. He will speak on the topic, Celebrate Freedom, Repair the Damage. He is no stranger to the open campus in Vincent, having launched his book, King Short Shirt, Nobody Go Run Me. Here in our he launched his book here at our literary fair a few years ago. Of course, we also know that Mr. Omad is Vinci by design. We look forward to your presentation. I would also like to especially welcome those persons from Oscar Allen's home village of Diamonds, a community which we know held a very special place in his heart. Finally, I am pleased to welcome you to the renovated premises of the St. Vincent site. We have only this week returned, and we are moving, actually physically moving the campus this week, and will reopen to the public on Monday, August 15th, and we are all looking forward to that. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and do enjoy the lecture.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dalrymple, for the official welcome. And I also wish to welcome, former Member of Parliament and current Member of Parliament, in addition to Minister Saboto. We also have the Honorable Fitz Bramble, who is Member of Parliament for this constituency. And of course, former Member of Parliament, Minister of Health, Brother Luke Brown, and congratulations. Welcome one and all, and thank you. And we are excited about, as you heard it in Mrs. Dalrymple's voice, we're excited, extremely excited about the relocation. If you notice, we have lots of space. It means the staff would be expected to produce more. And we will need your help to do that as we move forward. But we'll talk about that on another occasion. But welcome, and we're delighted. I want to apologize for the absence of Marcella Dublin, who just came in and she was overseas and just came in this evening and missed her ride, and so she's unable to be here. But I want to invite Brother Blazer to deputize for Marcella. I hope he can manage that, because he's using the latest technology to do that. And I notice he wants to do it without his glasses. Brother Blazer, welcome, and thank you for fitting in, if you're able to. Yes, you ready? Please welcome Brother Blazer. He will do the piece by Marcella Dublin. Brother Blazer.
Thank you very much, Ronnie. This is a very surprising one. The poem is called Repair the Damage. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to get the rhythm of it, to look at it. This is the first time I'm looking at it. But here goes. Repair the damage. From the recycled irons of our shackles, bridges we have built and statues of our legends sculpted, leaping forward with the resilience of our ancestors, who purged themselves of mystical spirits and insanity. with ritual tribal dances in Congo squares, Place de Negres, gyrating to the pounding of drums and reverberation of ringing bells, synthesizing notes of liberation, for upon their brows cane grows, held pathways to freedom. With half-healed wounds upon her back, and suckling infant on her lap, Mama told tales of the motherland and the longing of her soul to return. I'm coming. No, Bishop. I went a little too far now. While Baba plotted for the day to come, for the bitters in his metal cup will tomorrow bring the cleansing and repair the damage. But has tomorrow met us, picking at old blisters and bruises, still drunk from the notion of decolonization? Did it come too soon? Why has restoration not yet come? The native salvation, why does this unity still linger and self-hatred festers among the heirs of civilization forebearers? The damages of the transatlantic voyage that scattered us and the Berlin scramble that ripe Africa to pieces, lodged like cold bullets in our spine. We have leaped. We learned always to run, but we must now stop to tend our wounds that bleed. The time has come for us to heal. That's it. That's my first look.
Thank you, Brother Blazer, and I know you can do better than that, given that we just put him on the spot. And thank you, Sister Marcella Dublin, for that wonderful piece of poetry. Brother Blazer, thank you. I want now to invite Sir Errol Allen, the older brother of the late Brother Oscar, just to give some introductory remarks. Brother Errol, please come to the podium. Please welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Master of Ceremonies, Mrs. Dalrymple, head of the Open Campus here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, we are certainly pleased to have you. We are also pleased to have the representative from Sand Hill and that area, and also to recognize Mr. Luke Brown. Yes. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this brief opening remark will focus primarily on the life and times of Oscar Llewellyn Allen, who was born in Friendly Village on the 1st of July, 1942. He was the last of 9 children of 2 marriages. He attended the Connery Roman Catholic School until age 7, when his father died, and the younger siblings all moved to the Wesley Methodist School in Kingstown, following which he attended the St. Vincent Grammar School. I don't see Mr. hoped that he would have been here, Mr. Casper de Silva. Because he once told me that Oscar came up to him and boxed him, which was not really Oscar Allen. And Casper was really surprised. Anyhow, several years later, the three of us met together and had a discussion, and Oscar couldn't quite remember. However, Oscar, when he went to grammar school, was quite fond of football. And right from school, he went to the playing field, and quite often, he would leave the playing field and go home without his books. Fortunately, the gamesman who looked after the field will take his books home to Grenville Street. In the end, however, Oscar pulled himself together, and the late Sam Comijong once told me that in sixth form, Oscar had a different experience, and a different positive experience. And at the end of it, he completed his high school certificate and left school. When he left school, he was recalled to teach French and English. And he continued doing so until he moved to Jamaica to study as a Methodist minister. Quite a change from when he entered grammar school, or from he entered, yes, grammar school, and he had varying experiences within that institution. So it was that he went to the University of West Indies in Jamaica to study as a Methodist minister. So there it was that Oscar then was in Jamaica. When many of the students who were there were quite surprised that in the evening when they went to the library, Oscar was there for prolonged periods. And his interest then, apart from the religious studies, his interest was in history, politics, and philosophy. And he spent lots of time there. After his first few years, he was sent off to another country, and that was Haiti, for 1 year to pray, to deliver his services in Haiti. Now, Haiti is a very poor country, and Oscar was very much moved by the situation in Haiti. And it is reported that he gave away his suits and his shoes and adopted a new form of dress. He also went through the whole of the country and was really moved by the poverty that he experienced. He then wrote back to the authorities in Jamaica to say, this is a place that needs help. And we are suggesting that there be training and other aspects to develop not only Methodism, but the country in general. He did not get any positive response. So he continued, and when he returned to Jamaica, he continued the element of change which he thought was very necessary in order for Haiti to make progress. He then found that there was not very much support for his way of thinking, and eventually they parted ways, and Oscar went back to St. Vincent. I mentioned earlier that the new form of dress was the shiki and sandals after he had given away his normal clothing. So Oscar returned to St. Vincent, and in returning to St. Vincent, he elected to live in Diamond Village, no more in Kingstown. He was known philosophically to say, perhaps it was really my fault that I was not able to continue my career and not to have patience in whatever the authorities wanted. Several years later, however, when there was a lecture in honor of the late Archbishop Woodrow, one of the Anglican persons came to deliver the lecture. And during that lecture, Oscar posed a question. And the lecturer's response was that, you know, many of the things that you fought for, we now have them. I don't know what Oscar, well, I was there, but I don't know what Oscar's thought was, but he didn't proceed with the discussion. Now, I must say that I think that this was the most important part of Oscar's life, an influence when he returned to St. Vincent and lived in Diamond. He did many things within the Diamond community, and he published quite often in the local newspapers. He also published a book which said, "We want to become wise." And I remember telling him that the quality of the publication was not really attractive. And I was prepared to help him. But Oscar is really stubborn. And he continued and published it as it was. And I took some around to schools within St. Vincent. I think that this book could be improved. Certainly, the typing, etc., and be in a position to make a heavier impact than it did then. I wish now to share with you a personal experience from Oscar. Let me say that the late Sam Kumujong did say that in the sixth form, Oscar had very good experience, and they were very good friends together. Now, the personal experience is this. In the space of 1 week, two road users had been traveling closely behind Oscar when suddenly he turned in that direction on the right and nearly had an accident. He recognized that he was wrong, and the drivers cursed him, and he felt very, very embarrassed that he should have done such a thing. However, he thinks that it had the impact of his not behaving in that way in the future. You might ask, what does this have to do with emancipation? He answers this question in this manner. We all need to have significant events driven into our minds and memories so that we can guide our conduct going forward. Oscar suggests that we need a simple, reliable document for the experience of slavery so that we can discuss the outline and value of emancipation. Reading the story of our past commands us to open a new conversation with the future. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Brother Allen, for those remembrances. We really do appreciate them. And one of the things that the friends of Oscar Allen, and I'm sure Diamondites would be, friends of Oscar Allen also includes members of Diamondites. But I'm sure at some point we'll extend this project to persons who have even better and intimate information on Brother A's work. One of the next projects is to catalog in print some of his best pieces over the last 40 years. We started the process, but that's been slowed down a little bit. But then we have regained the momentum, and so at some point in the near future, you will have that as a gift from Oscar in one volume. So that's one of the projects that we would be pursuing with some urgency over the next few months. And when we come a begging, we will need your support. Thank you very much, Sir Errol. It's now my pleasure to invite a few members from Diamondites, just one, to make a presentation. Please come forward. Please welcome Brother Simeon and Sister Tigi.
Good night, brethren. A great pleasure to be here. We propose to do a quick cultural item. A taste of Oscar. He's older student than his younger student. As a matter of fact, Tigi grew up right near to Oscar's house. So she knows intimately everything. I'm going to do a piece because Oscar was not just about the study and the hard politics, but there are times in the village when we took time off to enjoy ourselves with singing, with chanting, with poetry, with drumming, and sip some banana and potato porridge or some bean stew or something. So we're going to give you a little taste of some of the things that we did when we were having lighter moments, so to speak. The first one, what we can remember, because I didn't rehearse, it's just from memory. It doesn't matter. It's a song by Barry Shavans. Barry Shavans was a Catholic student He was taking holy orders at the same time in Oscar in Jamaica. I think Catholic, or Anglican, one of the religions. And he later became a professor at the University of the West Indies. I don't know where he is now. But he is dead. Barry died. Okay. And that piece is about the day of Pentecost. It's named Block Up. In Jamaica, when you say block up, it means you're drunk. All right? And then the second piece we didn't get from Oscar. Oscar met it, we met it, all the way from Africa land. Because it's the Shaker movement, and we had a strong Shaker movement in Diamond. As a matter of fact, the historians say that when they banned the Shaker movement, the Diamond movement succeeded in having prayers all throughout the period. They refused to be banned. What they did, they moved the praise houses on top of some hills, and up in the mountain, and police didn't have time to come up there. So they had service all the time. So I don't know what the song means. All the way from Africa land, they come into here, they come in, oh. But it's nice song. In fact, I don't even know Tig, what it means. But we used to sing it, and we just sing it. And then finally, Tig is gonna do the poem.
Sing it.
What is called? The African alphabet. Right. So, block up. Barry. Block up. Block up. Sun is a rise and people say we block up. But the spirit of the Lord fly down like a fire. Grab wind we soul like a choir. Singing higher. 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 Him blow like a hurricane. Him blow the fire right down the lane. But the spirit of the Lord fly down like a fire. Grab wind we soul like a choir. Singing higher, 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 higher. Read that in Acts 2, the Pentecost experience. Coming up. All the way from Africa.
All the way from
Africa land, they coming to hear them blues singing. All the way from Africa land, they coming to hear them sing. They coming, oh, they coming, oh, they coming to hear them singing. They coming, oh, they coming, oh, they coming to hear them sing. I don't know what they were evoking the spirits. That was not Oscar. Oscar met that, we met that. And up to now, the Shakers sing that. To be truthful, I don't know the interpretation. I don't even think the younger ones know the interpretation. But it came from Africa. All right.
A is for Africa. B means black. See the black children on the freedom track. D, we determine with body and soul to end exploitation and give the people control. F is for freedom we are fighting for. G, we gonna get it and we must endure. H is the happiness we all can endure when I and I unite to get the system destroyed. J means justice and equality for all. K, no king shall rule and make poor people crawl. L, strong love will bind us all together. M is a mixture of Carib, Africa, and India. NO means no. It's no game. It's a struggle to take power from the few and give power to the people. Q is the quietness that comes before the storm. R, the revolution that gave rights to everyone. S is each sufferer who struggled for her class. T, the rise triumphant over the criminal ruling class. You must understand what you need every hand for the victory to achieve in this land. W, a lovely woman with the extreme task. Y, to save you and me from the criminal ruling class. Z, New Zion City, there's no turning back because A stands for Africa and B means black.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Tigi and Brother Simeon, for those lovely remembrances, poetry, song, and chant. Thank you very much. I want to acknowledge the presence of Brother David Naki Williams, President of the Garifuna Heritage Foundation. Brother David, thank you for gracing us with your presence. Let me take this opportunity now to welcome Sister Zita Barnwell to introduce our speaker, after which we'll invite Brother Dobrin to lead us in the second half of this evening's presentation. Sister Zita.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I was cautioned earlier today about the pronunciation of Mr. Ahmad's name, so I hope I'm going to get it right. Dobrin is an Antiguan Caribbean citizen. He is the chairperson of the Antigua and Barbuda Reparations Support Committee and one of 3 vice presidents of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. He therefore spends much energy advocating for reparations from Europe to the region for the crimes against humanity of the slave trade, slavery, and the genocide of indigenous peoples. He has recently been appointed as an ambassador at large by the government of Antigua and Barbuda with responsibility for its reparatory justice program. Mr. Omard is a cultural worker, playwright, director, and producer of both theater and music. He's also a calypso writer, judge, and analyst, and he's a published author. He was awarded the Sunshine Award Friends of the Arts for his commitment to creativity development and his consistent calls for the crafting of implementable cultural policies and programs. And recently he was also awarded the president of the St. Martin Book Fair Award, presented to individuals and institutions whose work is noted for its excellence and for combining literary, cultural, and liberation components in the service of progress of their people, of nation, and of humanity. He is a graduate of the University of the West Indies and 2 North American universities. Professionally, Mr. Ahmad is a management consultant offering services in various sectors nationally and regionally. He's married to a Vincentian national, Ingrid Williams Ahmad, and therefore he's also Vincentian. Welcome.
Yeah. Testing. Ah, gotcha. It's quite a production here. I think I finally got it. Let me acknowledge the protocols that have been established. I acknowledge also, and importantly, the presence of a number of old friends and colleagues. I see Adrian Fraser somewhere here. I see Bernard. I see Blazer, and I see Darky, who I understand have just been awarded some fabulous award. I see Jomo, Sister Lynette, who I gather is representing the Norris clan, and of course my old friend Sister Cheryl, who is sitting here. And I must also acknowledge the presence of the Minister of Agriculture, not a friend of mine, but I understand a friend of my son's, Coyote. I give thanks to the Open Campus and the Friends of Oscar for organizing this Oscar Allen Emancipation Memorial Lecture and for the invitation to be a part of it in this my Caribbean second home. I thank Brother Ronnie Daniel, if he was the one responsible for the design of the promotional poster for this lecture, particularly for finding a photograph of me when I had hair and wore glasses with designer frames. Thanks, Ronnie. I've been invited to speak on the theme, Celebrate Freedom, Repair the Damage, in honor of the legacy of Brother Oscar Allen, Brother A, as he was known to us, for his contribution to the socio-political, cultural, and religious life in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the region. I understand that this lecture, and again I quote, is a part of the Open Campus mandate to celebrate and recognize the outstanding contribution made by Vincentians at home and abroad. It is a mandate I think we should all applaud. Interestingly, it is my wife, Ingrid Nee Williams, who had a very close working relationship with Oscar, much closer than I did. He was one of the first persons to whom she was keen to introduce me to on my early visits to St. Vincent. Only recently, she reminded me that I asked her after my first meeting with him in Diamonds, what kind of mystic fellow that you're introducing me to? I don't remember the exchange, but those of us who have been married for a long time learn to trust our spouse's memory before even trusting our own. Reflecting, however, my question would have seemed reasonable, for at that time, I guess I was what was called a Black Power advocate, involved in that movement where loud poise and charisma and image were important bearers of the message. But it wasn't only me who found Brother A sometimes, and I quote, infuriatingly mystic. Others have suggested that his responses to their queries about life and living seem couched in some obtuse, suspended reality, while they wanted straightforward answers, answers rooted in the movement, in the moment, sorry. Ingrid has strong personal and ideological memories of Oscar. She tells a story of both herself and Oscar traveling to Anguilla, to St. Martin, and forced to take the ferry to their destination on a day when the sea was particularly angry and the rain poured in huge quantities as though trying to soothe the sea's ire. Oscar, she claimed, remained even more calm than usual during the journey, and at the end of it simply whispered to her, "I'm returning by plane." They did. She once functioned as youth coordinator and then sub-regional coordinator of the CCC, the Caribbean Conference of Churches, out of the Antigua Program Center. And she and Oscar worked together and conducted a series of seminars on faith and action for youth in the sub-region to build ecumenical study groups. Oscar would have led in theological reflection through popular education techniques and methodologies. He was at one with the theme of the CCC program strategy, ecumenism and social change in obedience to Jesus Christ and in solidarity with the poor, and its instruction that development activists must invest in communities to build new communities. On more than one occasion, I have stood before microphones here in St. Vincent as calypso commentator, as playwright, as novelist, as biographer, writing in fiction. My plays and my fiction have never, and I suspect will never be Nancy stories. My approach has been to create, perhaps design might be a better word, to design fictional characters and place them in the moment, in the real world as it existed at the time of writing, and to see how they functioned, to extract lessons from those behaviors that are of value to our society today and hopefully into the future. Those of us here who write will understand that in the process, the characters take on lives and directions of their own and lead you, their supposed creator, into directions and situations and decisions that you never foresaw and in many cases did not approve. I have thought about a number of ways I could address this presentation, Celebrate Freedom, Repair the Damage, in honor of the legacy of Brother A. And at one time, honestly, I was fairly confused. Maybe I had too much time to think about it. Eventually, I think my approach to writing for the theater or for the fiction novel won out. And so I will proceed in that vein. So I present to you a character steeped in Christian faith and action so deeply that early in his youth, he signed up to become a formal steward of the faith. And even when that did not yield fruit, maintained a relationship not with God, but with his God. He constantly reads the book of Exodus, dealing with the deliverance from bondage, and has developed a radical view of the meaning of the Emancipation Proclamation of the British Parliament that freed enslaved Africans here in the Caribbean. For unlike the British do-gooders history that sees emancipation as a gesture of kindness, he correctly labels it as a commercial transaction, where the British government bought from its enslaver and planter classes approximately 665,000 African bodies for 20 million pounds, now valued at approximately 43 billion Eastern Caribbean dollars, and set them free. This character agrees with the chairperson of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, Professor Hilary Beckles, that the British Emancipation Act is perhaps the most racist act passed in the history of the British Parliament, in that it, for the first time, British legislators, the British state, agreed with enslavers and planters that the African body could be bought and sold, that it was chattel. The character quotes the declaration of the Apostle Paul. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free, and let no one take you back into bondage. He celebrates freedom as the process through which you remain free. It is the process of resistance to any force that attempts to limit freedom. He repeatedly interprets in his popular education sessions the parable of Jesus and the healing of a man's withered hand as a defiant response to the guardians of traditional thought, guardians of the sacred law, the status quo, a warning to activists that power brokers in the community will not sit back and let justice reign. He takes his directions from Mark 3:6. And the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. This character, early in his life and career, understood the importance of community, not only in the sociological context, but also in the physical reality, in the geographic space sense. And so he remains true and dedicates his life to the building of community in his physical community. He understands culture. He battles with the Kamau-Brathwaite division of Caribbean culture into two traditions, the great tradition of the enslaver, of the colonizer, which was imposed on Africans through military might, or the pressures of governance models, of religion, of education. This is the great tradition on one hand, and on the other hand, the little tradition, those beliefs, those behaviors and modes of entertainment and worship and family life that we have retained from our African roots. He understands that carnival was a symbol and a vehicle of mass intellectual rejection, an emancipation effort from below, a social, spiritual, and political identity movement. My character also understands the practice of party or electoral politics in small societies, to the extent that he is invited an invitation which he accepted to function within a political organization. He would later suggest that he saw the organization not as a third party in a two-party Caribbean political structure, but as a third force monitoring government commitments and pledges and mobilizing communities in both public and private spaces to demand accountability, to demand transparency, essentially to demand good governance. That is the character. What is the moment? How do I define the real world within which I choose to place this character? It is a world where Caribbean political leadership is relatively young. The Prime Minister of Grenada is about 40. Other leaders in Guyana, St. Kitts and Nevis, a little older. Those in Dominica, Jamaica, Antigua, and Barbuda, bordering only on 50 years of age. Barbados, I think, a little older. It is a political leadership today that is in most cases trying to rekindle and capture the vision of regional unity of our past leaders. It is a leadership that promotes a practical policy of Africa-Caribbean relationships, a leadership sections of which seem unafraid to confront the developing world on the inequalities over which it rules. It is a world in which new forms of evangelical worship, many based on messages of prosperity, are mushrooming, a world in which organized religion, as our character knew it, is losing ground, as it half-heartedly acknowledges its role in the enslavement of Africans in our region and makes absolutely no effort to contribute to the repair of the damage caused by enslavers and colonizers that it authorized and to whom it provided spiritual cover. The now, the moment, is defined by an alive and increased attention to rights causes, where human rights are defined as standards that recognize and protect the dignity of all human beings and are acknowledged as being inherent to all human beings. Although the hypocrisy of the capitalist world shines through on many issues and occasions where the rights of non-white people occupy a second tier of their consideration. It is a world where the cries for justice are as loud as they have ever been, where the demands for racial justice, for reparatory justice, and more recently for climate justice are now fully entrenched alongside the demand for gender equality in the global human rights struggle. How does this man, capable of operating within or crossing the boundaries of our religious, political, and socio-cultural belief systems and sectoral interests, how does he function in the world that I have just described, in the moment today? I pause here sort of to clarify any misdirections that I may have inadvertently created. I am certainly not trying to fathom how Brother Oscar would be functioning today. That is not possible. We can never know. And even if we did, it would not be of particular usefulness. What I'm trying to do is understand how the principles he stood for and the tenets of his faith are applicable to those of us in this, the moment, to understand where we are, both as individuals and the Caribbean society, where we could be, and perhaps certainly where we should be. We are here in memory, in celebration of his life, his thinking. I select two issues within the theme for exploration during the rest of this talk. They are the issues of regional unity in the context of the celebration of freedom and reparations in the context of repairing the damage. These are two issues, incidentally, to which Brother A actually gave thought. He wrote, acknowledging the efforts of two Vincentian prime ministers, James Mitchell, who launched the OECS Unity Campaign in 1987, and Ralph Gonsalves catalyzing the regional reparations movement. Oscar noted that both initiatives have generated some interest and support, but, and I quote, something seems to be missing in these invitations to trans-border cooperation. They seem not to touch the vital arteries, the political imagination of the populations at the roots of these nations. 6 years later, we can check the continued validity of these statements. The Antigua and Barbuda Reparations Support Commission, a government-appointed commission with mandate inter alia to identify, design, and promote programs for the commemoration of the abolition of slavery, celebrates Emancipation Day, August 1st, 1834, as the birth of the English-speaking Caribbean. That day when for the first time the majority of the African populations of the region together acted on their own free will and embarked on the journey of creating West Indians, which we remember the Caribbean Commission, that Caribbean Commission report describes that West Indians as a rare creation, a people of many nationalities, many races, many faiths, and different cultural heritages, faced with a challenge of building a single community. This yearning for unity has remained with us as a people manifesting itself in different forms over the centuries, at times even within the borders of colonial rule. 50 years after emancipation, we witnessed the emergence of Pan-Africanism, described by C.L.R. James as a wholly Caribbean phenomena, born out of the thinking of Edward Blyden, George Padmore, Amy Césaire, Sylvester Williams, and many others, Caribbean people who had that vision of a Pan-African world. And that vision, of course, carried to its highest heights by Marcus Garvey. The calls for federation and independence among us emerged shortly after the First World War. The upheavals of the 1930s signal a regional rejection of colonial rule that led us to the federation of the late 1950s and onwards into CARIFTA and CARICOM and the OECS. I dare say, however, unlike Oscar, that the yearning for regional unity lived and still lives in the political imagination of the populations at the roots of our nations, and in many ways has been translated into physical realities. The last time I checked, between CARICOM and OECS, they manage over 30 regional organizations and institutions that impact directly on the lives of Caribbean people in education, public health, in standards, in banking, in disaster management, in agriculture. There are no shortage of acronyms in this region, starting with the letter C. We can, however, not ignore the constant threat to regionalism by those political leaders guided by national sovereignty and those sections of our populations guided by economic and social self-interest. There's no doubt that our journey to regional unity is littered with unfulfilled mandates, unaddressed decisions, lofty, ambitious speeches, competing priorities, among other ills. But there is much to celebrate about our emancipation journey, our management of freedoms, freedoms constrained and constantly threatened by those who bought and sold us. My glass is perpetually half full. The ultimate goals of the Caribbean single market and economy and political union in some practical form is not beyond us. I switch to the second aspect of the talk, this issue of reparations. I do not wish to overstay my welcome, and so I will try to be brief in this discussion on the struggle for reparations as it is developing here in this region. At the forefront of that struggle is the CARICOM Reparations Commission, and 11 national committees or commissions existing from the Bahamas in the north right around to Suriname in the south. Permit me to share some background information on the CARICOM Reparations Commission and the national committees associated with it. And I think it's also quite important that this review be done here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Because in July 2013, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, placed a proposal before the Heads of Government Conference of CARICOM that it should engage the United Kingdom, France, and Holland on the issue of reparations for native genocide and slavery. The minutes of that Heads of Government meeting reflect that the conference expressed unanimous support for the Gonsalves initiative and agreed that the approach to be adopted at all levels should be more of a nature of development conversations rather than being confrontational. It also agreed to establish national committees on reparations in our various countries, agreed that the Prime Minister of Barbados should chair a small committee of heads of government that included the head of government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to oversee the work of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. Today, the Prime Ministerial Committee is chaired by the Prime Minister of Barbados, Honorable Mayor Motley. Herein lies one of the strengths of the regional reparations movement, in that it is authorized and backed by Caribbean sovereignty. Interestingly, however, herein also lies one of its weaknesses, that decision-making is not particularly speedy or flexible. The Commission comprises of Professor Hilary Beckles, the director of the Center for Reparations Research, which was established in 2017 at the Mona campus, and the chairpersons of these national commissions. Its diplomatic and financial interests are managed in the CARICOM Secretariat. The Commission meets quarterly and held its first in-person meeting since 2019, only a few months ago in March in Barbados. We see reparations in the international sense as redress for gross and systemic violations of human rights law and humanitarian law. We are also guided by UN considerations that the most common forms of reparations may be restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. Our Caribbean movement, in summary, sees reparations as the process of repairing the consequences of crimes committed against our people. As such, it is non-confrontational and conciliatory. Reparations seeks to heal, atone, and bring closure to the human tragedy of mass slavery. It seeks, finally, to restore a higher moral order by removing the shame and guilt that persistently poison the relationships between descendants on all sides of the crime. It can therefore be considered a very Christian process, the effort to heal and atone and bring closure. It is a process which I think Brother Oscar will be at one with. Interestingly, however, research in Jamaica has yielded a strong negative correlation between church adherence and reparation consciousness, showing that people who regularly go to church generally showed more reluctance to speak in favor of reparations. The sentiment of forgive and forget and move on, regardless of the understanding of the criminal nature of enslavement, seems strongest among Christians. Perhaps this is one of the observations that prompted Brother A to suggest, and I think quite correctly, that the issue of reparations has not yet touched, and I quote him again, the vital arteries, the political imagination of the populations at the root of this nation, of our nations. But this is the ongoing work of the CARICOM Reparations Commission and its National Commission members, the public education and awareness efforts, the advocacy to reinforce to our populations and therefore to our political leaders that the bid for reparations is not a begging exercise. It is not only about money. It is primarily the attempt to restore equity in social relations, equality before the law, and justice within the fabric of human diversity that typifies humanity. The reparatory justice process requires that those seeking reparations should establish first that the crime that I mentioned earlier, this gross violation of human rights law and humanitarian law, that gross violation took place, and secondly, that the crime can be connected as contributing to the ongoing human rights harm and injury. CARICOM Reparations Commission has clearly defined the crime for which we seek reparations as the slave trade, slavery, and the genocide of indigenous populations, acknowledged internationally as crimes against humanity. There are ongoing discussions presently within the CRC and with stakeholders, historians, legal scholars, and representatives of the Asian Caribbean societies as to whether indentureship, defined as deceptive indentureship, should be recognized as a crime against humanity. Caribbean Reparations Commission asserts the following: that European governments were owners and traders of enslaved Africans, that they instructed genocidal actions upon indigenous communities, that they created the legal, financial, and fiscal policies necessary for the enslavement of Africans, that they defined and enforced African enslavement and native genocide as in their national interests, that they refused compensation to the enslaved with the ending of their enslavement. Instead, they compensated slave owners at emancipation for the loss of legal property rights in enslaved Africans. That they imposed a further 100 years of racial apartheid upon the emancipated, and impose another 100 years policies designed to perpetuate suffering upon the emancipated and survivors of the genocide, and also have refused to acknowledge such crimes or to compensate victims and their descendants. We are therefore extremely clear of the crime, this violation of international human rights law. What then are the ongoing human rights harm and injury that we experience here in the Caribbean? They are defined in the CARICOM Justice Program and the CARICOM 10-point Plan for Reparatory Justice. And I urge you, since I do not have time to go through details of all the 10 points, I urge you to, in this day of the technology, to go to caricom.org and take a look at this CARICOM Reparatory Justice Program, the CARICOM 10-point program, which I'm suggesting to you outlines a path to truth, to justice, and to reconciliation. It is a development plan for the region, as let's say contrasted to the lineage plans that are developing elsewhere in the diaspora, where people are talking about reparation payments to individuals and families and descendants of enslaved people. The plan we talk about here in the CARICOM Reparations Commission is a plan for development across this region. It identifies those areas or those sectors of the regional development agenda where the injury and hurt caused by slavery, the slave trade, and genocide remain ongoing. And it further defines in broad terms the remedies for healing. The plan provides for us the basis for reparatory justice negotiations between CARICOM and European nations responsible for the damage. And very, very quickly, let me just run through Without further explanation, the 10 points, point 1 calls for a full formal apology. It calls for the development of an indigenous peoples development program. The details you can glean. You know, Columbus landed around here. I think we're estimating 3 million indigenous people living up and down this region. By the time Europeans left, there were less than 30,000. And so there's a special call for a development program for those 30,000 people living in small communities. Dominica, here, of course, Trinidad, Guyana, Suriname. It calls for a repatriation, a fully funded resettlement program for those persons who wish to return to the continent. And we're not talking here necessarily of doing things like paying passages or that sort of stuff. We're really talking about making the preparations in terms of the legislation, the migration efforts, education for children, work permits, etc. A full program that allows repatriation to the continent very easily. It calls for the establishment of cultural institutions and the return of cultural heritage to museums and return centers. And if you've been following the news, you will understand what within the last couple of months that the British museums, French museums, I think even the Netherlands, have been responding to these reparatory justice calls and returning stolen property. The British Museum, I think only 2 or 3 days ago, returned some 77 of the Benin bronzes that they stole out of Nigeria, returned them to Nigeria. These are all parts of the reparations call. The assistance in remedying the public health crisis. Again, this could take some time for explanation, and I urge you to do some reading. But what we're talking about, the public health crisis in this country, we're talking about the prevalence of diabetes and hypertension among Caribbean people, where we are now estimating that 60% of persons over 60 years in this region have either hypertension or diabetes or both. And that these conditions exist nowhere else in the world except perhaps for Mississippi. And that our physicians have made those connections as to why African people that are on the continent do not suffer as we do here in the Caribbean from these diseases. Obviously, it's a question of the diets, the forced diets, the sugar and salt that we experience, and of course the stress, the work stress, etc. That has affected our DNA. And there's a call for this to be addressed. I move on quickly. The question education programs, there's no need to talk details about that. We're also talking about the psychological rehabilitation that is needed, that as a result of the transmission of trauma. 9 is the right to development through the use of technology, and 10 is the question of debt cancellation and monetary compensation. I know I've gone through this very quickly, but I'm sure you see that those 10 points, addressing them will constitute a lecture of its own, and I certainly don't want to overstay my welcome. You asked quite correctly, I think, what have been the achievements of the CRC over the years. I could reel off a list of accomplishments, but maybe during question time I may entertain some of those sort of questions. But let me summarize and suggest that we have made major strides in globalizing the support for our reparations struggle, of intensifying the pressure on Europe to join us at a table for negotiations on reparations. We have done this through diplomatic engagements in the UN, in the OAS, the African Union, the Pan-African Congress, the United Kingdom Parliament, Parliament of India, a number of other international organizations, bodies. We've done a lot of work participating in lectures and conferences and meetings at the UN, in the House of Commons in Britain, in Benin, in Ghana, reaching to Ethiopia and South Africa, Senegal, Costa Rica, Martinique, the different universities, Harvard, Oxford, Tulane. A lot of media engagements, press conferences, international media interviews and articles, television programs. We think that we have been part of the reinvigoration of a global reparations movement. We have been part of the launch of the National African American Reparations Commission and have established relationships with other organizations in Canada, Brazil, Venezuela. We have had positive reactions in both the academic and the faith-based communities internationally, private sector companies, the Bank of England, Lloyds of London, etc., are beginning to respond to these calls for reparations. I'd like to close by sharing 3 important things as far as the reparations movement is concerned that have happened quite recently, within the last couple of months. The first one is the question of Digicel, the chairman of Digicel, Dennis O'Brien, that has directed resources within Digicel to establish a funding mechanism for reparations to Caribbean countries. It's a fairly tidy technical exercise in that the establishment of these funds require serious resources, legal resources, accounting resources, because this issue of reparations is not a very simple thing that I take up money and hand it to you. Reparations, monies, etc., are controlled, tightly controlled within international regulations. And so the establishment of that funding mechanism for CARICOM reparations is really an important step, that those persons guilty of crime and who are prepared to acknowledge it have a structured path through which they can make payments if their response is compensation, that they can make payments to the Caribbean government. The second one, and I think quite an important one, is a statement made by Prince Charles. I get mixed up, Charles or Philip, but the one who is the next king. Charles, Prince Charles. You will remember that over the years, whenever British royalty or British political leadership came to this region, their response has always been, hey man, that thing happened a long time ago. Forget it. Let's move on. We have given you some aid. That has always been their response. And regardless how we always rejected that understanding that reparations and aid are not the same thing. Aid is something that you decide to give, that you can withdraw, that you have absolutely no responsibility to give. Reparations is a different case. We are talking about it as, let's say, compensation for crime that you have committed within international law. And so when British come to this region, and we just had the visit of another set, Princess this and Kate King. They came to celebrate the 70 years of Queen on the throne and accuse African countries of keeping their leaders very long. But anyway, Prince Charles has just made, at the Commonwealth meeting in Rwanda, heads of government meeting in Rwanda, made a very important statement. Statement says that the time for a conversation about the wrongs of slavery is a time that has come. This is the closest we have managed to hear from British royalty about acknowledging their role in the wrongs of slavery. And we find this statement very important, and it is something that, he must always be reminded of as we continue this trek towards reparations. And the final thing that happened only last week is the support of African countries. We have for 2, 3, 4 years been really focusing on our efforts to get African countries on board with this Caribbean as far as reparations is concerned. And we have been making major breakthroughs. For Emancipation this week, we had a major visit in Guyana of African royalty, 6 or 7 traditional kings and queens who were in Guyana to celebrate emancipation with the Guyanese public. In Antigua, we hosted an ambassador, Ambassador Namboka from IDO. IDO is the Attica International Development Organization. It's an organization that manages the Alliance of Traditional Kings and Queens in Africa. And we had the ambassador celebrating emancipation with us in Antigua. And at the same time that this was happening, there's an international reparations conference taking place in Kenya. And at the end of it, the president of Kenya offers and commits African support to the CARICOM reparations cause. And so what we are saying is that the movement is growing as we move and understand the concept of a global Africa. And when we talk about global Africa, we are talking about Africans anywhere in the diaspora thinking along the same lines. We have no doubt, and I'm sure that Brother A would have none either, that the reparations movement is going to be the great political movement of this 21st century. And there's nothing that can stop it because it's embedded in the search for justice, the search for equality, and the search for democracy. And further, just to quote from that book that I have here with me, author who says that the work of reparations and remaking good relations then requires nothing less than the transformation of the world. I thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Brother Dobrin, for a very comprehensive presentation and very informative as well, and we really do appreciate this conversation this evening. So please give another round of applause to Brother Omad. It's now your time to engage Dobrin, and we want you to keep the questions as precise as you are able to, so that we will be able to maximize the response. So please, we will take your questions now, and we will do that for about 20 or so minutes. Then we will close, and then we'll invite you to delight your tummies with a glass of soup before you leave this evening. So please, questions for Brother Omad. May I ask, yes, Brother Saboto, may I ask, is Mr. Horn here? Is the microphone?
Thank you very much, Sister Cheryl. Sisters and brothers, and I want to recognize my dear brother and comrade Omad. And when I leave here, I'm going to call my best friend, your son, Coyote, and to tell him that we have a lot of work to do to catch up with you. I want to thank you for a brilliant lecture, and I think we need to give him a special round of applause again for the presentation. It was really heartwarming how you described Oscar, and I was happy that it wasn't only me, but you heard from the audience that we all were of the view that he was a mystic man. He displayed really no vanities, but contentment, love for the working people, belief in the collective, community work, a foundation in God and Christian precepts, and he was about the duty of repairing the damage, as the poem said, and we repeat it. Brother A brought out of people things they themselves did not even know they had inside them. And I want to pause here for a bit, because I was not around when he was Brother A, the politician. I only knew Brother A, the community activist. But there's something fundamental about Brother A that is different from many other persons. He believed in the spirit of volunteerism. And when you study the classical economists, he will tell you that you need to mobilize the factors of production, land, labor, and capital. And very high on the agenda is the mobilization of capital. But for Brother A, it was the mobilization of people, because to him, people amounted to the strength, and it was in the people that he saw capital. Important. Brother A also, in my mind, had a more interactionist approach to development than a structural one. And I think this answers the question about how do we really reach how do we touch the vital arteries. And I was happy with your honesty when you noted that with all the work that the governments are doing as it pertains to reparatory justice, if you take a stroll through a rural community anywhere up and down the Caribbean, and you ask the man who is sitting down on the block, or the sister who is going to church on an evening, or the Sunday school teacher about reparation, there is a disconnect. And I think that that is an important point of departure for all of us. I want to close with this point. I am of the view that if we do not unlock the spirit of collective volunteerism in an interactionist manner, we will not be able to touch the arteries, the vital arteries of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Soboto. Any other questions or comments? Yes? Sister Zola.
Yes, good night. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. My question is, what exactly is the CRC's approach to the issue of reparations for Native genocide? Thank you.
As I mentioned in the presentation, the CRC recognize fully Native genocide as this crime against humanity. And so that the reparations claim on Europe is also focused on the historical facts and wonderful historical facts documented here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for example, of the removal of indigenous people to the small islands, Baliso and Bataway, yes, okay, help me to that. To live in conditions where lizards could not survive. And we're talking about documentation in British archives. This is one thing about them, they kept amazing records. And they have now been moved to start destroying some of them. But I think that our historians have managed to get into it. What the plan, the 10-point plan calls for, as I mentioned, is a development program aimed specifically at the indigenous communities that are existing still in this region. University of the West Indies has been offering things like scholarships, I think 5 to 10 scholarships a year to those indigenous communities. The whole question of land ownership by indigenous people, traditional land ownership, is again on the front burner in countries like Dominica, for example, where those conversations are again there. And so within the CRC, within the 10-point plan, it is the development of that indigenous development program for indigenous people that is the focus. And as I said, you know, we're talking development, and so we're talking, you know, schools, we're talking health institutions, we're talking industry, etc., within those communities. That is the intention of what can be done with reparatory justice funds.
Thank you. Brother Kwame, and then I see Brother Dave, Brother Providence.
Yes, good night, Mr. Omar. That's Frankai Partner, the one you thought was Antigan.
Yes.
I just speaking as a drummer and looking at the history, at the banning of the drum, and asking a question of finding a medium that I could get on into the people's psyche and reach the masses more to appreciate the wrongs that the former colonial masters have done to us. I believe that we find something like the medium that we could relate to people, because if you check the whole European history, you will find the Chichong drum was banned because the colonialists, whether Spanish, French, or whoever it is, recognized the African and the Indian had one thing in common. They pray to the Chichong before they chop it down, before they met the drum. And I think the main reason why they banned the Chichong drum is to try to cut off the people from the ancestral spiritual soul, and they impose their religion on our people. So I think a medium relating the drum to the Baptist religion could play a role in reaching the masses, because the masses is a strange kind of people when they're very forceful in the religious concept. So I think the reparation committee must look at that medium.
Thank you, Brother Kwame. Brother Dave, and then Brother Providence. I don't see any other hands this time. No need to respond?
Yes, good evening. I want to pick up on something that was said by the politician, Minister of Agriculture, when he mentioned about the disconnect between the man on the block or that woman dressed up going to church and whatever. Why is there that disconnection? I think this year we celebrate 184 years since we say we had emancipation. Over the years, I've come to reflect on our history and to look at all of this in a different, from my own perspective. I don't have to be right. But is it that 84 years or whatever is not enough for all of us. And when I say all of us, I'm a strong believer in who I am. Black, beautiful, whatever, however you want to look at me. Because up to now, some of us black people have not come to appreciate ourselves. And I have a problem with that. I would die and I wouldn't see we get that consciousness in our system or whatever, however you want to look at it. So as the minister spoke about that disconnect, I am aware that we all are not ourselves up to now. And then what about the politics? What about the politics that continues to confuse all of us? We have to look at that. Because they are the political directorate. And if I can criticize as a decent human being, maybe not having all the education in the world, but I want to make a critical comment to say something. And you as a politician can't listen or does not appreciate and you just diss me like that? I have a problem with all of that. I am in support of all the efforts. I know I wouldn't live to see that because I know I'm coming, I say this pretty often, I'm coming to the end of my tenure. But when I see people of my skin, my color, behave in a certain way, and maybe I need to look at that aspect of it, because they have adopted a certain kind of selfishness and pressuring their own people, just like the white man did, or maybe in a different style and fashion. So that's my concern, but I wish those who are in the forefront can really see us through with all of this. But I know a lot of people suck their teeth, as was mentioned. Some of them don't believe in what we're talking about. As you mentioned in the diaspora, how they're looking at, compensation for whatever would have happened to all of us. But like I said, I wish the journey, those who are on the journey, those who are in the forefront, will bring success. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Dave. Brother Providence?
Thanks so much.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Brother Omar, for the real quality lecture. The question I want to ask though is, with the religion and the political division we have as a people in the Caribbean, unlike the Jews, for example, regardless of where they are, they remember the Holocaust and they galvanize around it. How can we get our politicians, various camps, our religious leaders to galvanize around the issue of reparation for our people?
I am here fielding a number of questions, a number of reactions that I wish I had answers to. Because honestly, we are all engaged, and many of us have been engaged for years in the process of trying to make the connections at various levels of our society around this whole issue of reparations. A number of things I think must be put on the table as to why success has taken place perhaps more at the upper levels of concern, upper political levels, upper academic levels, than at the levels of the man on the street or the woman going to church. We must understand that 400 years of indoctrination that our people have suffered. And they had suffered this through our education systems, through our religious systems, through the governance systems on which we are brought up. The whole question of power, who has power, how power is exercised. The questions within education as to who our heroes are, who makes the best music for us, you know, who are the intellects, who are the creators of history, who supposedly are the discoverers of geography and medicine, etc. That process, through education, through religion, has really dumbed down our people for quite a long time. But luckily, we have had people struggling throughout all these years, and many have kept some of these flames. Some of these flames are light, and it is on those backs, I think, that we stand and that we can move forward. But it is not reasonable, I think, to expect all of this to vanish and we simply find a way of connecting fully with the masses. We have to battle with them. I mean, I am talking about people that will look at you on the street, acknowledge the work you're doing, and simply say to you, "Hey, listen, Darby, listen, when you get the reparation money, you can keep that, eh? You can keep that." Because there is also very, very strong, and I see this in older persons in this Caribbean, a resistance to even discuss the concept of slavery. To discuss it, to talk about slavery. That is two things I think are at play here. The question of shame, that you were enslaved, that your parents were enslaved, that your parents suffered the indignities that we are talking about. And there's that shame that they do not want to be associated with it at all. And so these concepts, these discussions are not discussions they want to engage in. I think also at this point in time in our societies that we have lost in most of our Caribbean societies, if not all of them, that we have lost rather the concept of the radical traditions that perhaps existed in our countries, let's say 50 years ago. That what we now have as mass movements in our societies are simply the political parties. If the political parties represent for us what mass movements are, then we understand why our societies are particularly divided. Because the divisions are coming in many ways from the mass movements, which are now the political parties. And so, if I talk Antigua, for example, because of the government support for the reparations movement, large sections of the opposition are automatically against it, because they are automatically against anything that the government supports. And we have to find a way to battle through that. It has not been easy. We have been making, as I say, we have been making some grounds. We have been having some success. I think over the years, one of the problems we have is that we have not established criteria for evaluating our work, for assessing the progress that we have made. But I can talk for, I think, a number of countries. At least the concept of reparations within our societies, at least from the word, is recognized and is understood, I would think, by most people in some of our societies. The question about the religious leaders, the churches, especially the established churches in the region, and if I'm looking at reports around the last Emancipation Day, a number of these churches are at least recognizing emancipation again. People of my age will know growing up that emancipation day had completely disappeared as an important calendar day. It became August Monday in Antigua. It was a day for picnics. And so this movement of reintroducing it, Emancipation Day, is really fairly modern. It would have started, I would think, in this region in Trinidad. 1985 was the first country, perhaps the first country in the world, that recognized Emancipation Day as a holiday. And so we've seen it gradually growing across this region. And the churches are on board in many, many instances. One of the activities we have in Antigua with the Green Bay Moravian Church is an emancipation service and breakfast that takes place at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning on Emancipation Day. And this is happening in a number of the churches. So that a number of the religious leaders are certainly getting on board. The Church of England, that owned enslaved people in this region, has apologized on more than one occasion for slavery. They have made the apology. But it is what the chairperson, the chairperson of the CARICOM Reparations Commission refers to as research and run. So you do the research, you find the thing, the details of it, and you simply run from it. And the church has made, the Church of England has made absolutely no attempt for reparations. However, in a number of other church organizations, I think, I can't remember the name, it's not the World, the World Council of Churches, I think, has recently put aside, I think, something like $100 million for reparation causes. And so, you know, we talk in reparations, we talk about it being a marathon and not a sprint. And so we are within that marathon at this point in time. But there are things happening. And I think that this is important and energizing to us.
Brother Providence.
Hear me? Good.
Loud and clear.
Yeah. Good night, gentlemen, and the rest of the brothers and sisters gathered here tonight. Now, I must express my pleasure, first of all, if you permit me. I must express my pleasure that we can once again meet at this facility.
Can you just speak into the mics?
We can once again meet at this facility after a long and painful period of waiting. I expect that it will be a popular gathering place over the next 15 to 20 months as the people of this beautiful land endeavor to create a path which will offer the younger generations of citizens the reasonable hope to prosper in peace. There are several issues which we as responsible citizens will have to endeavor to provide answers and solutions to. Reparations relative to enslavement of Africans by Europeans for work on plantations of the Caribbean will no doubt feature prominently. I wish to urge that no political miscreant should be allowed to contaminate that delicate process. Permit me a few more minutes to refer to my salute to Oscar from under the Zaboka tree. From my vantage point here, and on the basis of my interaction with him for a period of over 50 years, Oscar Allen seemed to have lived a life reflecting a pursuit of connectivity with the one unseen, who is God alone. It is evident that he spent his last hours on this earth unswervingly faithful to this task of fashioning for us Vincentians a society in which peace and justice could thrive if they were anchored in the respect for the rights of all citizens who were free to pursue their goals in shelter of the overarching umbrella of freedom and equality under the sovereign authority of Jehovah the Creator. The farming community is painfully feeling the loss of our distinguished brother Oscar. We now search the space for the others who once stood in solidarity with him and had declared themselves to be committed to the effective liberation of our people, vowing to carry on the struggle in the cause of which several of our heroes of yesteryear had given their all. Those others have not honored their promises. They have seemingly changed their apparel so that they can blend with the new masses. The farmers now see them as con artists, and that those outstretched hands thought to be offering help were indeed full of grease. There is copious documentation covering a period of over 5 decades, testifying to Oscar's passion for the healthy development of our people. When this Vincentian Society sets aside the time to search out and evaluate the contribution of its scholars, the name Oscar Allen will stand out prominently, and the ideas he had espoused may well feature significantly in the conditioning of the psyche of that generation, so that the necessary shaking up of the society could be effected at last. His family should find consolation in the fact that Oscar's was a life that was honorably lived. He will rest in peace.
Thank you, Brother Providence. We really appreciate that. Okay, I think we have Brother Fitz, and I think I saw Dr. Fraser and Brother Luke, I think. So, and then we will close. All right, so Brother Fitz, Dr. Fraser, and Brother Luke.
Thank you, Ronnie. Good night, everybody. I will adhere to your requirement to be very brief and succinct. Mr. Omar, I want to express my appreciation for a very palatable presentation tonight. I think, for me, unfortunately, we don't have more younger looking people in the audience. I hope that it is not a dying practice where when we have lectures, because I remember since I was in secondary school, I've been coming to these lectures, and I've basically been seeing the same faces. So we have some work to do to really encourage our young people, you know, to conscious up. I appreciate your reference to our Prime Minister really fertilizing what I call the current reparations movement, you know, with his initiative at the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting a few years ago. And, but I have a difficulty digesting what I consider to be some inconsistencies with a modern pioneer of the reparations movement, our Prime Minister, championing a cause which highlights the word I'm looking for, which highlights the real unpleasant juncture or event in our history, slavery, and asking for reparations for that, for payment, essentially for a violation of human rights. Yet we have this pioneer of the modern or current reparations movement, our Prime Minister, subjecting the teachers of this country to what I consider to be a violation of human rights by sending them home under the orders of a vaccine mandate. I have a very hard time fathoming, trying to understand the inconsistency between your philosophical and conceptual, you know, approach towards repairing something that ought to be repaired, but on the other hand, your misbehavior, which creates that inconsistency, in my view. I don't know if you care to comment on whether or not you agree with my conclusion that there's an inconsistency there, and whether or not, if so, how can we repair something like that? Because I suspect that's not unique to our own Prime Minister. I suspect that to some degree that is pervasive throughout the Caribbean region among some of our leaders. So I don't know if you'd care to comment on that. And if you don't agree that it's an inconsistency, why don't you agree? Thank you.
I think we can cut that
What a
short
responsibility.
by simply suggesting that I will not come here to comment on matters of that nature.
Okay, thank you, Brother. So, Dr. Fraser and Brother Luke, and yes.
Brother Mad, thanks again for that lecture. I was glad when you made the point about shame. I think part of the problem about reparations and so on goes back to our understanding of slavery. And I think we have done a very bad job in how we thought about slavery. If we emphasize the fact that from the very beginning, these people who were brought here, they were not slaves. They came here and they were enslaved. And they fought it from the very beginning. Sometimes people say, how many rights did you have? That was not the point. They understood the kind of situation they were in, and they adjusted to suit. So they resisted in quite a number of ways. Fires, the calypso, they did quite a number of things. And the very fact that over hundreds of years, they were able to withstand being enslaved and to come out of it with their humanity intact, I think is a very important thing. So, and this first struck me when I was in Canada, and they were showing this film, what is it, with Africa, what was it? Yeah, Roots, yeah. And there were a number of Caribbean parents who told their children not to look at it because the fact that they came from families that were enslaved meant a lot to them. So I think the important thing, and today we have a problem even teaching history in school, but we need to understand exactly what slavery meant and that it was never accepted by our people. We fought from the very beginning and we continue to fight. I just wanted to, this is just in passing, where you mentioned 1834 as the end of slavery, and it's something which I've been trying to get us to move away from 1834 really to 1838. Because in 1834, it was only children under 6 who were really freed. But it's just in passing. But I think it's an important thing about this question of shame that we need to begin to address that issue again and to let people develop a better understanding of what was involved. In the case of St. Vincent, we probably our slavery really started after 1763, while places like Barbados since the 1650s. So we had a shorter period of slavery, but it did not mean that it was less atrocious than you had in the other country, because slavery was slavery regardless of wherever it was. Thank you very much.
Can I? This one? Yeah. Respond to 2 points, and I'll do it in reverse order. I use 1834 perhaps because Antigua did not go through that apprenticeship period. And so, you know, that apprenticeship period should have lasted for 6 years. Eventually was cut down to 4 years. And so, yeah, 1838 is the date, I think, in most other countries in the region, except Antigua and I think Bermuda also did not go through that emancipation period. Adrian, I agree with you fully about how we teach and how we view the slavery experience. One of the frequent responses or the objections to the whole reparations claim coming not only out of Europe, but coming out of a lot of our own people is this concept that Africans sold Africans into slavery, and therefore what reparations you're talking about. And this is such a twisted view of history, because the resistance to enslavement, the resistance to the raids, on the continent are phenomenal. There are many. There are dozens and dozens of African chiefs and kings and queens that resisted enslavement, resisted the capture and selling and transportation and kidnap of their people. And it's an aspect of history that we have not paid much attention to. One of the reasons why we are developing that association with the organization IDO that I mentioned is particularly around that, because they have researched this history, and we just had a real wonderful presentation in Antigua that we are going to publish, essentially, that details the levels of resistance on the continent to enslaving Africans. We have also been discovering through the research about voyages that at least 25% of all the slave ships leaving the continent, that there were revolts in one form or the other. The revolts up and down this Caribbean, as you mentioned, are many, and not only in physical confrontation. You're quite right. They poisoned people. They burned the crops. They let the animals loose. I mean, there were all sorts of ways of resistance, and we want to chronicle that also as a teaching tool. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brother Omar. I think Brother Luke and Brother Sean. Okay, Brother Luke will have the final word, and we will wrap up after he speaks.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've reserved the final word for perhaps the youngest participant in the event tonight, barring the great granddaughter of Cheryl in the front. But it's good to be here. I think we've had an important discussion. This activity is useful for several reasons. First of all, because it is dedicated to the memory of a very important freedom thinker in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And of course, we have had good food for thought in terms of how we should move forward with reparations in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I have a few points I'd like to make, some in the form of questions, some in the form of brief comments. I'm not sure that all the material will be able to be covered in a response from Mr. Omar. But the first thing which I think is important from a conceptual level is that we think of reparations as a repair of historical damage. And it therefore holds the reason that we should perhaps apply our mind to some of the prevailing legacies of slavery that need to be repaired. And maybe if there could be a chronicling of some of those legacies, then it might be easy for us to put in some form a possible program of reparations. Now, I know that there have been many ideas discussed about a possible program of reparations, but I think that that might be a way of sort of applying our mind to the issue in a focused manner. I just also wanted to address the point that was made about reparations being largely conciliatory. While I accept that that might in fact be the case, I think reparations pits us in an open dispute, if you will, with the heirs or successors, you might say, of the persons who were responsible for slavery. I think that might be confrontational rather than conciliatory. And I sometimes like to think about it as almost a court matter, whereas even though the outcome is going to be justice and the outcome might allow us to bury the hatchet, so to speak, it is an adversarial setting. I just make that point. You had mentioned in the course of your presentation that the conservative Christians, well, you made me feel like a heathen for a moment because I am very much a Christian in the church, and I have strongly held views in favor of reparations. So I'm not sure if you invited me to review my view of anything. But what would you say to the persons who might be Christians, who might be churchgoers, either in the traditional churches or the Protestant churches, to persuade them that reparations is a cause worth fighting for, and connected to that, and maybe connected to some of the other sentiments which were expressed tonight as well, how do we convert the current reparations movement into a popular movement? Because whereas you get the impression that it is a movement which is growing, it certainly hasn't gotten to what you might call that tipping point. And we need to see how we could get it to the tipping point. And one of the other things about which I have a curiosity is the a possible reference to a list of maybe some of the institutions, companies, entities that may have benefited from slavery and which could therefore be seen as particular targets for reparatory programs. Because while we are pursuing reparations on one level, at the governmental level, we've seen several reparatory initiatives from certain institutions, including, I think, the University of Wales recently, which has a connection, as was chronicled by Dr. Adrian Fraser with some passion in his column some time ago, which has a connection with local slavery in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and thought that a reasonable gesture towards our population would be to offer scholarships to go to that university. So how much a part, or how much is it a central part of the reparations movement that we could pursue these sort of outcomes with other institutions while we have the great plan?
That's a lot. Let me try and respond. Again, the last comments are perhaps the strongest in memory. Work is going on. There is a lot of work that is going on to make those connections with institutions, universities, etc., that have benefited from enslavement up and down this region. Grenada, 4 or 5 months ago, have just discovered and revealed the connection of, it's the Bank of England, I think, owned in 590-something enslaved people in Grenada. That research is now before us. In Antigua, the establishment of Harvard Law School, we have clearly historically documented that came out of funds of the royal family, royal estate. This is double L, not the Queen Royal, the royal estate out of Antigua, enslavement out of Antigua, to the extent that the Prime Minister and the ambassadors have contacted Harvard about this. We go back to the University of Glasgow, connections with enslaved plantations, etc., in Jamaica. So yes, that work is going on. The identifications are being made. One of the things established by the CRC is the CRR, which is the Center for Reparations Research. And a lot of that research is happening. As far as a list is concerned, I think, you know, that website that I referred you to, caricom.org, where you can then go onto the reparations website, will yield a lot of that information. The question about what do we say to Christians, I think what we say to Christians is that to look in your Bible. That if you look in your Bible, there are a number of instances where reparations is preached. It's amazing. I have it here with me. I didn't bring it here tonight. But there's a small publication called Reparations in Christianity or something of the sort that really catalogs all these quotations. I don't remember all of them. I am not particularly as entrenched in the church as you sound. But I remember the story of Zacchaeus, for instance, as a reparations Christian story of Zacchaeus giving back even more than he stole to the people that he stole from. There are a number of them. Please don't ask me to quote anymore. The whole question, you also raise an important question of our own reparations programs. It's what in the movement we like to refer to as internal reparations, part of our advocacy, in that we do not need necessary reparations from anyone to address some of the resulting trauma that we as a people have experienced. The bleaching creams, those types of issues we think we can address internally and do address internally as part of our reparations movement. One of the things with the 10-point plan is that it identifies what the proceeds of reparations are slated to be used for. But in that plan, we also understand that it is going to be difficult to make the connections that we want made about reparations until some of those traumas themselves are addressed. The traumas of who we are as a people, the traumas about skin color, the whole issues of colorism that exists within our society are things which we think can be addressed and which we do address at various levels in our various national commissions as some sort of internal reparation. My memory, that's about it. I hope I've covered at least most of the things you raised.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions. I really do appreciate them. And one of the things I say is that we have to continue the conversations wherever we are. We need to bring this good conversation to an end, and so I invite my sister Cheryl to raise a vote of thanks on behalf of the Planning Committee and the University of the Western Days.
Mankind Savior, tell me which part you live. Me want come sit and talk. Mankind Savior, tell me which part you live. Me want come sit and talk. Mankind Savior, tell me which part you live. We going follow the road and we going come see to find out how the Son of Man live. The Son of Man, Jesus take away my sins and he give me bread for eat and he give me wine for drink. The body and blood, eternal life. Eternal life. Eternal life. And when you eat this bread and you drink this wine, is remember you remember him. And when you eat this bread and you drink this wine, is remember you remember him. And when you eat this bread and you drink this wine, is remember you remember the body of the Lord, till he come again with kings of kings, with kings of kings. Jesus take my sins and he give me wine to drink and he... Yes. That's an Oscar. Diamondites should really be singing that lustily, because they know it. I see Simeon trying and Tigi, but Ket is not saying anything. Anyway, my task is simple. Very, very simple. The brother Oscar is so much to talk about the man. What a man. What a man. I think about him all the time. I know Omad was saying that we can't say what would Oscar do. But
We say that all the time, ask Kate. We say that all the time. If Oscar were alive today, when we are taking certain decisions, what would he say? And sometimes I try to get into his head. You know, if he were alive, to think of what he would say and do in certain situations. What a person. Anyway, I am supposed to say thanks, not to give a speech. And I know you want to go home. So let me thank. But here, listen, I want to change the protocol about how we thank. You know, we start at the head and the chair and the I thanking you first for coming and all your comments and questions. Because if you didn't come here today, Mr. Omar and everybody could have sit down up here today with a pack up, go home, and nothing would have happened. So clap for yourself. And then we thank CAP for helping us extend this more than us, because more than ever, and somebody made the point, because how are we going to break through the younger people with these devices unless we program it in there and make it interesting enough for them to pay attention? Because other than that, we can't come through. And Blaze and I had a discussion like this some time ago, like as if we dropped the ball, because there was so much consciousness among the people, and I don't know what's happening. And somebody talk about the disconnect. We have to do. I remember walking into communities and seeing communities active things to be done, and talking to the people in the community, and we come together. See me on know the roads up in Diamond, going up the hill by Salo and places like that, that mobilized people to do. The money was paid. Community development resources extended beyond what we now give for community development. It is ridiculous, and I'm sorry, but thank you everybody, all the contributions. Can I just do that? Because other than that, I go talk plenty thing. Thank you, Barnwell. Thank you, Diamondites, Tigi, and us, Simeon. Thank you, Mr. Allen, Sir Errol Allen, Dalrymple. Thank you. Thank you for your remarks, and my people. Kwesi Allen for designing the program and making Dobrin look so handsome. I said, what a thing, what a thing. Members of the planning committee, head staff of Open Campus, trust me, without them this would not have happened. To Sinners Hines, site technician, for continued support in this event. Go back up to the invocation by Phils, down to Dr. Joshua. We have members of the media, especially the Vincention, that have teamed up with Open Campus and friends of Oscar Allen to make this happen. So thanks to everyone. But just to make a point, Dr. Errol Allen, we sold several copies of We Want to Be Wise at the bookshop in Beckway. And they were not bought by local people, they were bought by visitors to the island. Thanks to NBC Radio for live stream. Omad, thank you. Proudly, thank you. One love.
Thank you very much, Sister Cheryl. And before you go, may I invite you for some callaloo soup. You turn right as you exit, straight to the training room, straight ahead, and take a